presence in this place, wherever that happens to be. It's where we want to be. It's where I want to be. So refreshing. You may be seated. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ross. They give me the mic occasionally. It's been a little while. I pretty much knew generally what I was going to preach on the next time I got the opportunity. It's morphed a little, and then a little more, and then a little more. But that's okay. Mainly, I just want to encourage people to seek to know God better. It's pretty simple, right? I love those things that are really simple that I don't think we understand fully, or at least I don't understand fully, right? I think it's the simple stuff. Sometimes it's really good to refresh your memory on what that stuff's supposed to be, what it looks like. Like going back and looking at an instructional video on something you've done 1,000 times, and you go, oh, I missed that. I don't ever do that. It still turns out all right, but maybe I could do it a little bit better. Understanding God is very challenging. We are made in God's image. So there are parts of us that are very much like God. The fall distorted a lot of that, so there's some other things that are associated with ourselves that make it a little bit of a challenge to understand. But we need to be up to that challenge. It's pretty easy to see biblically why this is important. Deuteronomy 6:5 says that we are supposed to love the Lord our God with all our hearts, with all our soul, and all our might. How do you do that if you don't understand him? How do you do that if you don't know him? And this isn't an overnight thing, it's a process. If I'm going to do it with absolutely all of my heart, I have to know what I'm loving. You get a new friend. It takes a while for you to figure that out. You get married, your spouse. You spend a lifetime trying to figure that person out. It's the only way you can actually love something. But we have to love him. The last song we just did, nothing else. We need to love him, not something else. And we need to love him first, not something else. We got to know him. We have to love him first, not ourselves. We have to know him. We have to not love something like him. We have to know him so that we know the difference. I know that it's possible to understand God. And I go back to the scripture, and you'll probably hear it every time I'm standing up here. I do a lot of seeking, I do a lot of pondering, I do a lot of wondering. And Matthew 7:7 tells us that if we ask, if we seek, if we knock. With God, it's always if you do, then I will. We have to do something. Can't just sit here and go, I'm waiting. Sometimes we're called to wait, and honestly, that's the hardest one for me. Just wait, chill, don't do anything. That one's tough. But if we ask, if we seek, if we knock, my challenge today is for you to seek, to ask, to knock, so that we can get some answers. If you've been at this Christianity thing for very long, if you haven't, the question always like, what is God like? Have you ever thought about the character of God? Have you ever tried to understand who God is? How do we do that? Well, there's a couple of different ways. There's natural revelation. That's you look around at the world around you and go, there has to be a designer. There is no way that this happened by accident. Stand outside on a dark night, summertime, shorts and a t-shirt, look up at the stars. I cannot do that without feeling about that tall. I didn't do any of this. I just get to be here. That's one of the ways we can understand God. He's way bigger, way more powerful than we could ever be. You can read the scriptures. There is an entire book, cover to cover, not just New Testament, Old Testament too, all the way through, that we learn the character of God. But have you ever read it and were like confused? Have you read it and looked at it and went, that doesn't make any sense? Have you ever read it and said, I don't like that part? Right? That's God, though. We know the Bible's about God revealing himself to us through stories. We know that we're supposed to love our God with all of our heart, our soul, and our mind. The better we know, the better we can love him. It's a challenge, and I'm challenging you. So the journey is going to be 2 examples and a warning. Mainly because understanding God and knowing all of what God has for you, some people don't start. Some people start and then stop. And some people do it and finish incorrectly. So it's easy to do all of those things. First example, King David. One of my favorite people in the Bible. God says that he was a man after God's own heart. Okay, we're supposed to love God with all of our heart. Maybe David's a good place to look. But I'm not looking for the good stuff. I'm not looking for when he did things right. I'm looking at when he was struggling, when something turned sideways, right? Christianity's easy when things are going good. When you're blessed in that portion of your life, whoo, go God. When you're in the middle of a struggle, go God. When you don't understand, right? David went through those too. We know everybody in the Bible, these are not perfect people. These are not, we don't put them on a pedestal, right? Because they're just like us. They are no different than anybody else sitting in this room. They were not, in fact, the entire Old Testament. God would come, the Spirit of the Lord would come upon people for times. We have the Spirit of God in us. So we're more New Testament and later, right? So David got chased around a lot. Saul was not good to him. There's just so much good stuff in there. But we're at the point where David is now king. And he wants to bring the ark back into the city. It's good. It's a good thing. And his comment was that during Saul's reign, that was never something that was done. So, new administration, things are going to be different. Let's bring the ark back. We've gone over this story in different parts. Pastor David's done an awesome job. I love the story. Of they're bringing, first David wants to do it. Number 2, they go and do it. They've got a new cart. They've got new oxen. They go, they grab the ark, they put it on the cart, and they're making their way along. And the picture I want you to think of is what we just finished there, worship, because that's what they were doing. They were singing and praising God while they were bringing the ark of God back. So they were in the presence where we are right now. They get to the threshing floor. The oxen stumble. Uzzah rights the cart. God strikes him dead. That's a hard one. I know it's a hard one because 1 Chronicles 13, 11 to 13. And David was angry because the Lord has broken out against Uzzah. And David was afraid of God that day and said, "How can I bring the ark of God home to me?" Anger, fear, separation. Sound familiar? We've all done it. Maybe it just starts at anger and separation. Maybe it's just fear and separation. Whatever it happens to be, it always ends in separation. The whole book of the Bible is about God restoring relationships, and Satan's all about tearing them apart. So here we have David, a man after God's own heart, has an experience with God more than likely, unlike most of us have ever had in our life. The presence of God killed somebody. So he didn't take the ark home. He's like, "I'll take that over to Obed-Edom's house. It's just going to stay there for a little while." The story does not end there, though. And the story is alluded to. What did David do after that? We know he got angry. We know he was afraid. We know that he said, "No, we're not going to bring the presents to the city." Right now, I'm going through the chronological Bible as my Bible in a year. What that does is it takes all of these Old Testament stories and it takes 1st and 2nd Samuel and it puts it next to the Chronicles, and then it puts it next to the psalm that David wrote in the middle of the thing he was going through. There isn't one specifically for this, but there's repetition in this. David always seeks. David always pours his heart out to God. He always asks for answers, and he always is on his face. And he did that. And I know, because it said the ark was only there for 3 months. And we know that in chapter 15, he sends for the ark again. 1 Chronicles 15, 1 and 2. "And David built a house for himself in the city of David, and he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent for it." There's a tent. Interesting. That's what Moses and people in the wilderness, they had a place for the ark. It was a tent. "Then David said, 'No one but the Levites may carry the ark of God, for the Lord has chosen them to carry the ark and minister to him forever.'" He went away, got on his face, asked God, went back and looked at all of the things that Moses had written down, and found out there were rules. Found out there was a certain way that the ark was supposed to be treated. Found out that there was a specific group of people that is supposed to carry the ark. It's not supposed to be on a cart. It's not supposed to be taken with oxen. And he finished the job he started with answers to his questions. He questioned, he got answers. He wrestled with a hard truth. At the end of this, Uzzah's still dead. He had an experience that he's never going to forget. But he learned something about God. So I think it's okay to get angry. I think it's okay to be afraid. I think it's okay to feel like we need a little bit of separation, as long as that is followed by why. We need to answer those hard questions. If we leave the hard questions linger, what good are we? Because we have questions. The world surely has questions. We need to be able to answer them. Example 2, knowing God in practice. So for my schooling I'm presently going through, I needed to write a mini research paper. I looked at all the questions and I went, which one of these is going to be the most useful? One of these do I not know the answer to? And the question was, how do the mercy and the wrath of God live within him together? How are they compatible? How are they characteristics that are okay to be together? That's a challenging question. Are we merciful in the middle of wrath? When we're showing somebody mercy, do we do it in that type of way? When we're really, really angry, do we show mercy and love? I tend to think I kind of step back and forth between those. They certainly don't coexist in a way that's really obvious to me. And, right, this is the questions the world has. How can a God that's merciful allow such and such to happen? How is that a God of love? How is that a God of mercy? How does God's justice, how does that show up in that? The world hangs its unbelief on the fact that they can't put those two characteristics together. That's why a lot of people go, I can't do that church thing. I don't want to know God. Mercy and wrath, nope, sorry. And then there's people that are like, oh, Old Testament, you see all this stuff about God. And then you get to the New Testament and everything's all pretty and lovely. And not really. The Old Testament is about God. The New Testament is about God. The Old Testament, he blessed people and he destroyed things. The New Testament, he blessed people and allowed Jesus to die a horrid death. All the same story. So, church, children of God, called by name from the beginning of time, you sitting in these seats, you listening online, we have to know God so that we can answer questions. Not the easy ones. The easy ones are easy. The hard ones. We know, pretty easy place to go, that God never changes. Not since before our time began, not after this time is over. Never changes. Hebrews 13:8. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, forever. Jesus was there at the beginning. So Old Testament, guess what? There he was. Today in church, there's Jesus again. Tomorrow, there he is again. And he's always the same. Malachi, for I am the Lord, I do not change. Therefore you, O children of Jacob, you are not consumed. I don't change, thus you are not consumed. Some things are starting to come together, right? So if God never changes, then he's not angry today, loving tomorrow, merciful today, and then something sets him off, and then he's fire and brimstone from the sky. Those things exist at the same time. That's why it's really difficult to see, because we struggle with that. Inside of us is a part that is in the image of God. And then there's a part that is in the image of the creator of this mess, Satan. So we struggle with the turmoil. So if we struggle with the turmoil, we go, well, then God has to too. God has to struggle. It's like, oh, fits of anger, emotionally charged rage. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I love you. No, it's not how it works. There is no turmoil inside of God. He is perfect love, perfect mercy, perfect justice, perfect wrath. The New Testament is all about the good news. It's fundamental to what Christianity is. The good news is that God is fixing relationships. He's making a way for people to come back to him, to not be separated from him any longer. So if it is good news and it is the truth, then God's wrath is for a merciful reason. God's justice is out of love. Those things have to work together. God understands sin. Satan distorts sin. God understands that sin separates us. Satan also understands that sin separates us. So if he can get us to sin, well, I wouldn't do that. If he can convince you that it's not sin, then you're not sinning. God understands that sin separates our relationship. If we cannot abide in Christ, then we don't have access to the Father because Jesus is the only way. The entirety of the canon of Scripture is all about restored relationships. In reading a few books, I think Thomas McCall summed this up really, really well, and this hit me. It was like, all right, that puts all those pieces into order. And I'm going to read through this. God cares about our sin, the damage it does to us, more than we do. That hurts. It's the truth. And it's scary. God understands better than we do the damage that sin does as a result of sin. So God's wrath is towards sin. It actually is merciful, loving, righteous, and just. We're called to hate the sin, not the sinner. Our struggle is against powers and principalities, not people. We are called to hate the sin. That's not easy to do because Satan's all around us going, oh, that's just normal. That's today's culture. Bible's still true. So God's wrath is actually holy, righteous, love expressed in a steadfast antagonism against all that is opposed to God, which is evil. Not something that is a fit of rage that is because something set him off. Divine wrath is also not the opposite of divine love. Indifference is the opposite. Doing nothing is the opposite. What about his mercy? So the world has a distorted view of God's love and love in general. The term unconditional love, and I may make some people angry this morning, but unconditional love is not biblical. It's actually a term that was come up by Carl Rogers. Definition of it is the idea of unconditional love is to separate love from moral judgment. But we're supposed to unconditionally love our children. That's what we're told. And I think a lot of Christians do it right. But the term is wrong. Because I'm supposed to love them no matter what they do, which we do. I'm supposed to love them and accept what they're doing. No. Nope. God never separates what's right from loving you. He'll love you right on through it. The fact that he's still giving us an opportunity to get it right is merciful. There's wrath at the end of the road. He's giving us a period of time. That's love. That's mercy. The fact that we were not struck down the moment we made our first mistake is love and mercy. And at the end of the day, we never can measure any of God's characteristics on our lifetime. It's a blip. God had the plan at the beginning, he was before time, he's got the plan for the end, and he's after time. We always have to look at what God's doing and is it right on the basis of a much longer time period. God's wrath will eventually destroy evil and sin forever. No more struggle. How is that not merciful and loving? It is. That is the ultimate. He's going to get rid of all this garbage while at the same time giving us the opportunity to have time to fix it so that we can see the other side of that. Longer time scale. Stop looking at blips. Start looking at the big picture. If we look at everything that God's doing on that short time frame, a lot of it doesn't make sense. And it won't make sense. And it can't make sense. Because we're finite and little. And time periods are little. And our life is little. And God is working on eternity. Back up a little. Start looking at the big picture. From the details, sometimes we lose the big picture. There's a big picture there. Consequences are different than God's wrath. Your parents probably told you, don't get too close to the fire, you'll get burned. Is it mom and dad's fault if you get too close to the fire and get burned? No. Is it God's fault that there's a rule that he tells you about that you break and then there's consequences? Also no. And at the end of the day, God's just character requires payment for sin. And what did he do? You owe me a sum of money you could never pay me. Oh, by the way, I just paid it. He required it, and he did it. He didn't ask us to do something we can't do. So he literally he justified his own need for justice himself because he knew we couldn't do it. Whew. That is why the cross is so powerful. It did something we could never do. Ephesians 2, 4, and 5 tells us that God, who is rich in mercy, and out of the great love in which he loved us, even when we were dead through our trespasses, deserving wrath, made us alive together with Christ. Mercy, wrath, together in one. It's pretty interesting. That was my second example. Now for the warning. So we looked at David, we looked at the process, we looked at an example of digging into God's character and really finding out what it's supposed to be. The warning hit me this week. I was thinking about this. I'm like, all right, how do I put it all together? How do I make it make sense? What do I want people to walk away with? What's the first commandment? Shall have no other gods before me? God's about to be first, nothing else. And the second is, don't make any idols. So rank those up pretty high if they came first and second. We have to be serving God and not something else. And idolatry is tied to that. So I got thinking, let's rewind to biblical times. What was an idol? Because Satan has morphed it into all kinds of other garbage. But let's just see if we can learn something from the way they were made. So I got a block of wood, carve away. I've got some stone, chisel it into a form of something. I've got some metal, some bronze, some gold, some silver. I pound it with a hammer. I've got some clay. I form it into something. We're digging around in the Bible, we're trying to learn about God, we're finding things that we don't understand. We find things we don't like. I'm making my idol. Carve that part out. Carve this part out. A little here. I don't like the nose. Let me make some adjustments to that. Digging around some more. Find something else you don't understand. I'm just going to ignore that. We'll just chop that part. It's just going to be a bust now. We're not going to do the rest of it. Lots of people will say, well, the God I serve isn't like that. If you ask that person if they're a Christian, they're probably going to say yes. What are they serving? Have they carved up what was God into something they're happy with? Have they chipped away the character of God into something they can understand? Have they hammered out the bumps and things that they didn't like until they had something that they were happy with? If you are not serving the Bible version of God, the character in true form of what it is that he's revealed to us, that is idolatry. That is something that you are serving that is outside of God, that is not God. And it's easy to fall into. Remember, some people don't start the process of learning who God is. Some people start and stop. Some people start and get angry and get afraid and some separation and don't continue. But some people think they finished by creating an idol of their own making of who the God is that they serve, that they've created on their own. That people is God in the image of man. That's backwards. God is complicated. God is challenging. But God will reveal himself 100% to those who seek. When it gets tough, when what you were doing was the right thing, bringing the ark back to Israel, but you've got the ark on a cart with oxen doing it wrong, and something bad, consequence, happens, there's biblical proof of the ends don't justify the means. Biblically, doing something for the right reason the wrong way is wrong. This story is a prime example. It's not easy. It's a tough one. So it's okay to be confused. Mind you, Satan is the author of confusion. If you'd like truth, the Holy Spirit is available to give you revelation of all the things that you need. Ask the question. If you knock, if you seek, if you go after this stuff, if you wrestle with what's going on, he'll let you know. He will get you there. And it will be a challenge. I mean, we're talking David, man after God's own heart, took him 3 months. It wasn't, figured out what it was, let's go back tomorrow and grab it. Built the temple, or built the tabernacle, the tent, got the Levitical priests ready, gave them the charge of how to do this thing right, went back and did it right. It wasn't quick. And idolatry. We always talk in here about how idolatry is anything that you put above God. But have you ever thought that you've made God something that's not God and put it above God. I have. And it punches you right in the chest. And it makes you want to throw yourself on the floor because he still loves me. And he didn't pour out his wrath at that moment. He's given me time, an opportunity to figure it out, an opportunity to fix it, to understand him better, so that when we get the question, how can God be like that? You can answer the question. So when we find things that we don't understand, when we find ourselves angry, when we find ourselves separated from God, don't stop because it gets challenging. Dig in, push. We're going to get answers. We cannot craft, modify, manipulate the living God that we serve into what we want him to be. Because remember, we're conflicted on the inside. So we're always doing it out of turmoil. Let's put it that way. Worship team wants to come. It's easy to do wrong. It's easy to start and not finish. It's easy to never start. But we're called. And we're called to seek the truth. We're called to get the truth. We're taught to live in the truth. We're taught to spread the truth. And the only way we do that is by finding the truth. Hard questions are for us. More often than not, they're for other people too. Because how can we tell people what God's like when we don't even know what he's like ourselves? Worship team's going to come. We're going to play some music. The altar is open. I spent some time down front today. If God was standing right here in front of you, I mean, walked in the door, entry stage right, what are you going to do?